Welcome back, Get a Grip listeners. Today we have the great pleasure to be joined by India Mandelkern, who was born in Los Angeles, California. She's been educated. She has a BA from Middlebury College in Vermont and a Ph.D. in history from the University of California at Berkeley. After all this school, she made her way back to Los Angeles, where she has worked as a curator, consultant, critic, writing on art, culture, design, and cities for a variety of publications, both local and national. From 2016 to 2018, she served as a fellow at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, where she got interested in public art and worked as a speechwriter for the CEO. During her tenure there, she created a field guide to the 16 different 1920s and 1930s streetlight designs included in Chris Burden's famous streetlight sculpture located at LACMA's South Entrance, Urban Light. The guide became an overnight hit at the museum, which led her down a rabbit hole, so to speak, and resulted in her latest book, Electric Moons, A Social History of Street Lighting in Los Angeles, published in late 2023 by Hat and Beard Press. In the book, she uses the streetlight as a flashlight to re-examine the history of LA, looking at how lighting shaped conversations about civic identity, transportation, policing, and the definition of public space, to name a few. She currently works at the Los Angeles County Transportation Authority, a fortuitously streetlight-adjacent gig, where she oversees the agency's blog, writes about metro construction projects and policies. Her Instagram is available to you on the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast website, along with the Instagram for her Street Lamp account and her LinkedIn. But before we go there, Greg, we're talking etissl.com. That's ETI Lighting.
That's right. And they were formerly known as ETI Solid State Lighting, but now they're known as ETI Lighting. You said it right there.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, it's a new branding that they just came out with, a refreshed logo, modern update of their original brand, which pays homage to their legacy as a leading manufacturer of LED luminaires, but also embrace the future with a renewed sense of energy and purpose. They're your trusted lighting partner with everything lighting you need, including their groundbreaking patents such as a night lighter, the spin light, and the twist fit. They've got everything you need, and they're an actual manufacturer, large company. ETI Lighting's here for you. Use them now.
I like the branding. I think it's a hit, actually. I'm just looking at it right now here on the
Excellent.
screen. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's nice. That's nice branding. Good job,
Mhm.
ETI. Thank you for
You bet.
sponsoring. And of course, the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. Greg Eric, you got the beautiful hat on there. It looks great.
Mhm.
You're shilling for the association a little bit here on the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast. But of
Right.
course, we have a convention coming up in August, man.
We do. St. Paul, Minnesota, August 19th through the 21st.
Glad you know. I'm booked, but I don't know what the dates are off the top of my head. I'm
You'll be
dying
there.
to get to India there here in a second, but if you want to be with all the cool kids, you're going to be in St. Paul, Minnesota in August, buddy. I'm telling you right now. That's where all the cool kids are going to be hanging out. So go to naild.org. If you have light bulbs in a warehouse and you sell them over a counter, this is your association. India Mandelkern, welcome to the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No problem. It's our pleasure.
Yeah, so we see you wrote a book, and I just kind of what I want to start with maybe, and I don't know where this will go, but a timeline of street lighting in LA. Can you kind of break it down for us? Where it started, where it's at, how
Yeah,
it got there, all that.
yeah, absolutely. Well, Los Angeles isn't totally unique from any other city, in the United States. I mean, in some ways, I think LA it's a universal story, but it's also particular. Like, many, many cities, as you probably know, got electric streetlights in the late 1870s, 1880s. So LA was kind of like in the middle of that. And I think, like many cities, the reason for getting them, is a confluence of reasons. You've got public safety. I mean, light forever has been associated with security or even the feeling of being safe, even if we can't really say whether it makes people safer. um, Civic pride. But, a lot of it comes from, cultural inferiority or feeling like you need to stand out, this like very late 19th century boosterism among a lot of American cities that, hey, this next city down the road got streetlights, so we have to have it too. So for LA, it was very much inspired by the news that really swept the country that San Jose had installed this giant light tower in 1881. And if you look at the Los Angeles Times, which only opened for business in early 1882. The light tower was one of the first stories to come out, and throughout that whole year, this was, very much like a big news story of that whole of the paper. First street light, it's this giant arc, 150-foot arc light mast, which was common in other Midwestern cities at the time. Goes up on Christmas Eve, or no, New Year's Eve of 1882. It
That's in
becomes a big
LA,
hit
the first one you
in
said?
Los Angeles. Yes, it was on.
Oh,
Yeah, it was on like Commercial and Main Street. There were
okay.
six of them around town. There was one in Boyle Heights. There was one in a couple other areas. It that blows up over the next couple of years, but then what I find is often a trend in lighting is that something that's the most brilliant idea, after years go by, people start nitpicking, people start expressing gripes. They're noticing that these arc lights are really, really difficult to service. There are bugs that are getting stuck in them, and the glare is terrible. It's almost like this giant flashlight that's shining down on you, and then you walk like around the block, and you're in total darkness. So that solution isn't working. 1904, there's still a bunch of
Can
arc
I
lights. This,
Sorry, can I go
yeah,
back a
go
little? I
go
just
for
had
it.
the
Yeah,
San Jose light tower. What exactly was it? Like, how can you describe what it looked like,
yeah.
and why did they
So
put it there?
I'm looking at
there.
pictures right now. I'm sending
I
them over
want to
to the
see the pictures.
producer to
Oh,
layer in
wonderful.
while she's
Yeah,
talking, so you can show what
Okay,
some of these
perfect.
these
yeah.
lights look like. But yeah, that's super. I'm doing the same thing while you're talking, guys. So if
Well,
I'm not
you know
looking
what
at
the
India,
best
guys, it's not because I'm not paying attention.
Yeah.
well, the best comparison to it is the Eiffel Tower, which,
Oh,
and there are people out there that think that, and there's no clear, 100% connection that could be made, but that this San Jose light tower, they called it the Moon Tower, and it was just got a lot of press and was talked about across the country. It made its way to Paris, and that influenced the design of the Eiffel Tower. But it kind of looked like that. It was there was a main street, and it was the arms of the tower kind of straddled the street, and it was, I think, 150 feet, 200 feet high, whole bunch of arc lights on the top. And there are postcards to these days that just shows how giant this thing was compared to all the sizes of the buildings. So it was really an impressive monument, in addition to being, a utilitarian piece of infrastructure.
So
So
was it the
it got
first?
a lot of attention.
Yeah, was it the first streetlight in the U.S., or what they call a streetlight, or or light tower, or whatever it was?
No, there were some Cleveland, they were doing some experiments in some parks. Indiana, Wabash, Indiana got some in 1880. New York experimented with some of these masts. But San Jose really got the most attention just because I think the architectonic nature of it. But and gaslighting was still very prevalent in a lot of different American cities, and I think part of the reason why San Jose got all this attention, or why electric lighting really kind of took off in these smaller Midwestern cities, is because they hadn't really invested so much money in gas lighting. I mean, New York got gas lights in the 1840s, and there are books that are published about what kind of worlds were illuminated now that New York was had this technology. But in many ways, electricity, we don't really think of it this way. But I mean, it's pretty amazing to think that there's this technology that, like, a wind can blow and it doesn't flicker or smoke or go out. You don't need a person to go light it every night. So, I mean, it took place in the Wild West, and it kind of was the Wild West at the same time.
Well, despite the fact that I think gaslighting today by the government is more popular than ever, but that's a whole other conversation. I think gaslighting is very popular today, but not the same kind of gaslighting. But what I wanted to ask you though, so the Eiffel Tower is not the OG, right? And in this kind of world, it is a beautiful. When you go to Paris, you take a river cruise at sunset or something. You come back up and you see the Eiffel Tower. It's pretty beautiful to see. It's spectacular, actually. And you're saying that, but the residents of these towns reported not liking these towers. They didn't like them. They didn't like the light they emitted, and they didn't think they were beautiful. Is that true?
No, I think that well, A, Los Angeles never had a tower that
Mm,
looked like the one in San Jose. It was more like a giant 100-foot pole in the air
mm,
that looked very it looks very strange. If you look at some of these photos from the 1880s, you see these buildings that, you know, maybe are 3 or 4 stories high, and then you see this giant pole
mm.
surging into the air. So I mean, I think that something that becomes very trendy one day will, you know, a few years later, people kind of tire of it. And I think before long, people really craved sort of a more human scaled lighting fixture, like gas lights had always been. So in the early turn of the 20th century, you get the civic improvement society
Hmm.
that decide that they want to install these, you know, 12-foot high lampposts around down Broadway. They had their own little civic improvement organization that was very common at the time. I always think it's kind of funny. They called themselves the Broadway Boulevard Improvement Society, not really
Mm,
realizing that Broadway is kind of how it was supposed to, it's kind of a redundant word.
mm.
But this guy, he had studied in France, you know, had this, there were a lot of business interests who were involved. And obviously they see the potential of lighting to really create, you know, draw a lot of people into the business district and spend money and, you know,
Mm.
boost LA's reputation as this kind of progressive, you know, economically rich area.
So
So
there is a
they get
Broadway in
going.
LA that's
Yeah.
not New York City, though. That's what I'm just making sure for the people
Absolutely.
listening.
Yeah,
Okay.
Broadway. Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
yes. I keep forgetting that we are not based in LA. But yes, Broadway is the an old road in Los Angeles, and it historically was a theater district downtown. And it was the street lights that eventually lit up Broadway, and that was the first time LA had ornamental street lights, not these
Mm.
giant masts where there was one mast in the middle of a neighborhood. This was the first time you have a road where you have something similar to today, like you have this spacing of ornamental streetlights that continue down the road, and they're really elegant and they're decorated and they're really designed to draw people to just walk down the roads and, you know, kind of enjoy themselves. It's very pedestrian friendly. So this doesn't start until these lights are turned on for the first time in 1905. It's a huge, huge civic event. I mean, we don't really think of lighting, you know, lighting ceremonies as something that's, you know, front page news today, but back then it was the front page of the LA Times. You know, all of Los Angeles apparently was there. The mayor flipped the switch, and it was a really big moment for LA
Wow.
because, you know, for them it represented being, you know, being part of a real progressive city. And the last line of that article says, you know, we finally have a great white way like New York does.
Mm.
So I think Broadway was a very significant and deliberate choice for the first streetlights in Los Angeles.
And many of these streetlights are still there in service. Some of these older ones, have they been converted or are they gone?
That's a great question. So LA is kind of unique in the sense that we actually still have a lot of old historic posts. Those original 1905 fixtures that were installed on Broadway are no longer, but and as I was saying before, a few years go by, you know, they're very excited about these 12-foot fixtures, and then people realize, you know, we need something brighter and taller and more impressive. And hey, San Francisco just installed these beautiful lights on Market Street, so why don't we hire that lighting designer, put him up in LA, and ask him to come up with something even bigger and more brilliant and more ornate? And some of those lights actually are still there. Many of them, most of them are gone. There's a couple that are still lasting there. But I mean, what's interesting about LA, and one of the reasons why I was, in addition to being a Los Angeles native and living here, is that there is more streetlight diversity in LA than any other city in the United States. And many of them are still here from the 1920s, which is pretty incredible. So, I mean, some of these old neighborhoods, you're walking around and you see these streetlights, and you look around and realize that, you know, this streetlight is older than the road. It's older than, you know, the buildings. And you know, it really is the oldest piece of infrastructure that's kind of connecting you to the past.
What
Is it the
technology? You go first.
well, yeah, technology's coming, but as far as is it the post that it looks different and a little more ornate? Is it the fixture head on top? Is it both? I know technology is another big thing too, but starting with the design of the pole and the fixture itself.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, with my book, I mean, there's two different angles of looking at this. There's one, the actual lighting itself, the lighting technology, and obviously none of that is the same whatsoever. Los Angeles is like 98% LED now. So, none of those old technologies are still around. We had incandescent lights for a very long time, mercury vapor in the 40s, 50s, 60s, sodium vapor, metal halide. But I'm talking about the posts, like the architectural
Mm.
fixture itself. So these are, most often they were cast iron. They were custom designed for certain roads, certain
Hmm.
neighborhoods, and they really were symbols of neighborhood pride. And in an area like
Hmm.
Los Angeles, that it's a young city, there's so many neighborhoods, it's very spread out. It was, expanded really, really rapidly in a very short time. These posts are really, they're ways to sort of say where you are or create an identity for a particular boulevard. Wilshire Boulevard, one of our main drags, had these cast iron posts with these like naked ladies on them, and there's these giant light boxes. And Olympic Boulevard, which is another parallel big boulevard, has these dragons. So it was very much a way to kind of mark the identity of the street and provide continuity to a street that might be very, very long and have very different kinds of buildings on it, and to really be a marker of civic pride for a young kind of rapidly growing city.
Streetlights are so ugly now. The poles
Yeah.
are and a lot of them are just wood in Canada. They just have a big, I think it's funny to have a cut down
Yeah.
tree stuffed back into the ground, and then you can you stuff the tree back in the ground, but it's dead, and then you you screw lights to it and run wires across the air to one light to it's very ugly. It's not just not beautiful; it's very ugly actually. And then, you combine with that the way the fixtures look. And I'm just looking online at some of the pictures, and I looked in your book when you sent it. The way the lights work, there was beauty was incorporated into the design and personality. Why don't we do that anymore?
Well, it's a great question. It's also something that in my conclusion of my book, I talk about a streetlight contest that we launched in 2020. Obviously, the pandemic was a little bit of a hiccup to that the conclusion. There's a little bit of a delay, but it was precisely that question that you're asking. I mean, I think that yeah, the golden age of these ornate streetlights, it was very tied to the City Beautiful movement, very much an ethos that if you create this beautiful environment, people will be more inspired to be the best versions of themselves and conduct themselves better. After the war, I mean, streetlights become more and more utilitarian. A big reason of that is because their definition changed. It wasn't just about drawing a lot of attention, creating this pedestrian environment that was really welcoming. It was also about traffic safety. It was also about security, and those things have always mattered. But LA went from being a largely pedestrian culture to a car culture in a very, very short period of time, and probably one of the most places where this was felt most dramatically. I mean, by the 1920s, 1 in 3 Angelenos owned a car, and it just exploded. So, the work that streetlights were asked to perform changed from being, purely aesthetic, functional, but also, uh, uh, civic minded, to also something that was meant to be primarily to keep drivers safe. So that really changed the conversation quite a bit. In the 1960s, after a lot of civil disturbances, a lot of concerns about crime, street lighting skyrocketed in Los Angeles, and oftentimes it wasn't a beautiful, ornate, often more expensive pole, but let's see, how can we get the brightest pole possible here in the shortest amount of time for the least amount of money? So that really changed the landscape, you know. But going back to that, I think that's something that that city leaders really acknowledge, that streetlights are ugly, and especially with LED technology, a lot of these lights were designed to have a different kind of bulb. Even those drop sodium vapor bulbs they just look a little bit different than this LED. It looks like kind of like the Cobra heads or these little kind of alien looking squares. And so in 2020,
Somebody put a
LA,
laptop on top of a pole. So you've unpacked a lot of stuff there. Okay. All right. So I just want to go back to the
yeah,
beginning for 1 second. Okay. At the beginning.
yeah.
So you talked about how people believed that having a beautiful environment filled with nice things changes people's behavior. I don't believe that. I would say I know that to be true. Okay. Like I don't think that's disputable. People that when they go into messy spaces, they've done these psychological tests. They act messy. They throw stuff on the ground. When they go into a clean space, they don't. There's definitely something to the atmosphere that the what's around us that I think matters in our behavior and how we conduct ourselves. What's interesting though is that the lighting industry is beginning to abandon the connection between exterior outdoor lighting and safety. I don't know if you're aware of this. Um, and I'm just going to tell you about something that I'm going to ask you for a comment on, and you think if it'll help. I assume that you want to return to more beautiful cities and stuff like that. I'm assuming that. Is that true? That you
Well,
would like to?
I'm a fan of nice looking cities. Yeah,
Yeah.
prefer a
Okay.
nice looking one to an ugly one.
So the five principles of responsible outdoor lighting, which is a collaboration between the International Dark Sky Association and IES, does not mention safety at all. And I was on a call with some engineers last week, and the guy kept bringing up safety, and I had to keep telling him, if you design your lighting system for the task at hand, it will be safe. It goes without saying. You want to design the lighting system for the task, not for perceived safety issues. And so we're starting to see that perhaps the task can be made to make the city more beautiful. Like maybe that's the task that we need to embark on as the lighting industry. What do you think of that?
Well, I do think that it's very, I mean, I think you guys would agree that, just creating more light doesn't make things more safe. I mean, we've shown over and over again that, there's been studies of lighting that maybe crime, goes down on this one street that has bright lights, but it will just, jump the next street over. I mean, I think that it doesn't, I think that's something that we know now, or the brightening lights in order for roads. Sometimes that might encourage cars to drive faster. So
No,
I
it's actually
completely
the other
agree.
way around.
Yeah.
It goes further actually. So one of the researchers that was on the Restoring Darkness podcast proved in his research on a study that could be replicated very easily in any North American city. He proved that lighting makes no difference. That when they increased the lights, turned off the lights, dimmed the lights, changed them to LED, there was no increase in crime or accidents, which is super interesting.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I'm disagreeing with that. I'm
Okay, yeah,
saying
yeah,
that, it's just not conclusive. That, I think that there's been this perception for many, many years, and this predates electricity. It
sure.
goes down to, the 16th century, that more light creates more security. And I think that that's something a lot of people still think. But I think that that's very, very difficult to prove. And I think that's exactly what, this researcher who was on your show probably said, is that it's just much messier, much more slippery than we would think. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah, I think
I'm
that the
not
idea
disagreeing
of,
with you. I'm expanding. I'm saying that it's actually more
yeah,
than
okay,
from my experience than you think. I think you're 100% right. Just that you're more right than you think you are.
got it.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So
Well,
I want let me
I guess the way that I would, oh, go for it.
no, no, you go. You finish up.
Okay, well, I wanted to comment on creating more, you know, creating lighting that does the job, that, will create a safe environment. I mean, one thing that we have been dealing with, though, is that, we might have an optimal level of lighting, but we're having a lot of trouble, A, keeping it on because of theft, and B, I mean, we've had actually a lot of not only copper wire, but I mean, the theft of these beautiful streetlight poles. So, although
Oh
I love
man.
to believe the idea that creating these, creating beautiful lighting, creating beautiful infrastructure and beautiful urban design will, kind of create a more peaceful society. I think that, we're in this unprecedented time where things that these poles that have existed for, almost 100 years, Pasadena, close to where I live, are now being, just ripped out of the ground and sold for scrap. And so now we can't, these are bronze streetlights. They were installed in the 1920s. And now, I've talked to fabricators, and they're like, well, we could try making them out of aluminum. We can't, something that's existed out of bronze for 100 years now. We wouldn't dream of creating any light fixture in a remotely expensive material these days because it would get stolen. And I mean, we had
Yeah.
a similar problem on a bridge. It was got a lot of publicity. These beautiful bronze poles that were stolen, so we had to rip out the rest of the poles. Our Bureau of Street Lighting is safeguarding them while we have fabricators trying to make replicas of a material that no criminal would want.
That's terrible.
And that, and I'm going to interject a little because that was going to be my next question. And I happened to see an article that came through Inside Lighting today, a few hours ago, and it said there's an estimated 25,000 streetlights out across LA right now that are not functioning. Making many areas into darkness, and the cause of outage is vandalism and theft. People stealing all the wiring. I didn't
Yeah,
hear poles as
yeah,
much, but all the copper wiring and everything, and residents are frustrated. They're trying to chip in to pay for it. There's backlog repair times. They're trying to look for an answer, and
Well,
that's
maybe more
unfortunate.
peaceful
That's crazy.
societies create more beautiful cities. Maybe it's the other way around. You know, maybe you need the peace first, and
yeah,
then you get the beauty
yeah.
after. I don't
How
know
do you
what to
do that,
say.
Mike?
I
That's
don't know.
yeah. That's
I
very
Because
possible.
I
it's
Yeah,
sell
I
light
mean,
40%.
bulbs.
Yeah.
Oh man. So let me ask you, going back to these beautiful streetlights that are being stolen by a pack of scoundrels in LA, like what are you thinking, buddy? Like I just want to slap that person. What's the matter with you? Why would you do
yeah.
this?
That's what I think.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
Come on,
That's
guys. We can do better
oh,
than this.
like if you're gonna pull off a heist, like I could get into a good heist, but like not streetlights. What are you talking about? What
Yeah. I mean,
is there a I find that I really like American Art Deco architecture. There's a darkness in it that I like and a light in it that I like. I think it combines a lot of emotions and human feelings in the architecture. Are these streetlights largely Art Deco in their kind of feeling, or are they Art Nouveau, or what style are they in? Do you know?
that's a great question. So, I mean, a lot of the oldest streetlights, at first they were these kind of very Beaux-Art, like um, fixtures, with these, big glass globes. But I think that the golden age of street lighting is very neoclassical. And I
Mm,
think the reason for that is because at the end of the day, LA, you might have this awesome modernist architecture. You might be able to take a lot of risks if you're building a home or a building, but streetlights are owned by the city.
mm,
And the city is generally pretty conservative. And in LA, we had this organization, it still exists now, it has a different name, this municipal arts commission that had to approve the designs of different streetlights before they were installed. So if something looked too out there, they didn't want that. They wanted something that looked, classical, it was relatively conservative. I think that they really kind of gravitated towards like these European aesthetics, things that conjured ancient Greece and Rome. And if you look at a lot of old streetlights, they have these fluted columns.
mm.
They really recall Greco-Roman designs. And I think there was a very conservative ethos in that they wanted to create a nice whitewashed vision of a city that was primarily Anglo and white, and to attract business to the commercial district. So they had an agenda in the way that streetlights looked. So they aren't really as out there as some homes you might find or some buildings that you might find, because at the end of the day, they're civic architecture, and they didn't really serve that same job.
Hmm.
That being said, Los Angeles had a lot of homegrown streetlight manufacturers. Some of the big ones were from like Missouri or Ohio. I don't know if you've heard of Union Metal or King Fahrenheit. They were some of these old big guys. Union Metal, I think, is still around. Um, but LA had a lot of manufacturers too. I mean, it was quite industrial city, and they would create these really kind of weird designs that they'd be pastiches of different architectural traditions. And then when you get to a couple of them that I mentioned, like these giant light boxes on Wilshire, there isn't really one architectural or design tradition you can really point to. They're kind of grab bags of all different kinds of styles. So I think that there is this I do think there's a quality of LA streetlight that's a little bit different than a little bit different than other cities in the United States. There's some stuff that's just, a little bit weird. I mean, there's this one company, they were called Lelux, very mysterious. There's not a lot known about them. A lot of these went out of business, but it's almost like you get these, Greco-Roman motifs, but then the flutes are melting and there's something almost psychedelic about it. So
Mm.
they're, yeah, the more you look, the more you see, but you get some of these motifs that don't quite make sense. And it's very interesting.
Wow. And
So you're,
you go, Greg. I know what we're gonna
yeah,
wrap this one up with. I got a
yeah,
question
yeah.
for
So
for
your
India
book
here in a second.
is looking back at how it's got to where it is, and are you thinking about the future and what to do about it next? I know right now we need to get these lights working, but are you positive about it? Or you
Yeah.
is it okay? What do you got?
I don't know how we're going to solve the copper wire issue because this is something that obviously isn't contained to LA, but something that's rampant around the entire country. I mean, I know our Bureau of Street Lighting is trying these really insane fortifications. They call them castle walls. It kind of looks like that, just to burying these pole boxes beneath the ground, anything that they can do. But I really think these are short-term solutions. I really think the answer, and what I think that more organizations are looking to now is things like solar. I mean, it's still really, really new in LA. There's probably only like, I don't know, 1,000, 1,200 solar streetlights right now. But it's an old grid, and when a copper wire thief steals something, I mean, it could take $20,000 to fix that light. It
Yeah,
take
for sure,
days, and we
for
just
sure.
don't have the manpower. One caveat to all this discussion of smart city technology and how many advances have been done with that, and the cameras and digital signs and EV charging stations and things like that is you can have all these really fascinating technologies, but at the end of the day, if someone pulls the wire out, you still need manpower to go out and fix it. And a remote monitoring unit, yeah, can tell you when the street lamp is out, but until you get the crew, it's not really doing that much.
I think we just proved that or electric light is neither the cause nor the solution to crime. Right there. Like, I mean, people are stealing the wires while the lights are on, I bet. Like, it's obvious that the light doesn't go off until someone cuts the wire, I would assume. Um, Light pollution as a status symbol. Okay. So here's an interesting one. So you have this picture of South Korea beside North Korea from space or from the satellite or whatever, right? And they show it and they're like, yeah, see, democracy and capitalism is the best. Look at all the light pollution. And the reality is that light pollution is pollution. That's actually not good. And so we need to invert that. I think this idea of beautiful lighting, and all the other issues aside for a second, beautiful lighting that is going to reduce light pollution and minimize light pollution and mitigate light pollution and have a beautiful aesthetic is the direction that we're heading. India. I think it's going to happen. Maybe it'll be 100 years. Maybe it'll be 50 years. Maybe it'll be 20 years. Who knows what an epoch lasts, right? And when it starts. Um, how do we get rid of the light pollution and put back beauty into the status symbol again? That would be my question. Is there a way to do that?
Well, I think it's already happening. I mean, I think that,
Okay.
yeah, I've seen those photos of North and South Korea, and I think that more and more people are realizing that, hey, I don't want to have blinding lights on all day, not all day long, all night long. And I think that if you look now, it used to be where it was a privilege to have electric light, and they first came to busy commercial districts, and it was very much a status symbol to have street lamps in your community, whereas poorer neighborhoods would have been dark. Now I don't think that's necessarily true, and I'm not going to blame street lighting for all of light pollution because I think only a small part of that is from street lighting. A lot of it is from digital signboards, floodlights, I mean, there's a constellation of different sources that cause it. But I
Mm.
think that now, choosing to live in a darker communities, and these dark sky organizations, people who are interested or activists in that space, they tend to not be the poorest people. They tend to be well. Many of the communities in LA that are darker or you know, uh, do have sort of more nuanced lighting tend to be wealthier communities. So I think that's changing. I think that it will continue to change. I think light pollution is one of these things that, since you can't immediately see cancer, it doesn't do something right away. People don't really take prioritize it as much as some other forms of pollution.
Mm.
But I think that more and more people are recognizing that, we don't want lights on all the time, and we do have ways to deal with it. I mean, we have motion sensors, we can have timers. And I think that we'll probably see more of that in the coming years as it becomes more and more, there's more research and the public,
Yeah,
begins
it's
to
not a
care about it more.
technology or a research and development problem. We have the technology. The technology exists. Just needs to be engineered into the right fixtures, and we'll have the problem solved. The
Yeah, and
uh,
light is really cheap. And when something's cheap, people use more of it. So I think that, getting the message out that, just use only the light that you need is kind of important to disseminate, because now, it isn't really a privilege to have light. Anyone can afford it. So now the conversation needs to shift.
yeah, and we don't want to light up our poor neighborhoods like prison yards. I bet you that has consequences too. Um, India, where can people find your book? And do you have any final thoughts for the Get a Grip on Lighting listeners?
Well, you can find my book on Amazon. It's called Electric Moons, A Social History of Street Lighting in LA. And you can also buy it on the publisher's website, hattonbeardpress.com. But yeah, Google the title and you'll find a way to obtain it quite easily. And final thoughts. No, I got into street lighting just very haphazardly, and I realized that, it was a rabbit hole. I grew up next to a street light, and I never really cared until I started digging into it. But I'm just so grateful that through doing the research for this book, I've met such an incredible community of people who, whether they've been lighting designers or architects or like local council people or activists. And I really think that studying lighting just kind of opens the floodgates, so to speak, to just, incredible different communities and issues. And that's really, really cool.
India entered the lighting industry the same way everyone else does, Greg, by accident. I'd like you to go to etissl.com. Check out their new branding, Greg Eric. Holy mackerel.
No accident there if you go there. Check those guys out.
Woo.
Trusted lighting partner. They got everything you need for lighting, exterior lighting included, which we talked about today. So make sure you check those guys out.
That's
ETI.
etissl.com. And of course, do you have light bulbs in the warehouse out there? You have a warehouse, you got light bulbs in it, you sell them over the counter, you sell them on the internet, you sell them on the, yeah, I do. Why are you not part of the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors? This is your crucial shield. That's right. Join us. Go to nald.org. And also, all the cool kids, they're going to be in St. Paul, Minnesota. Greg, what's the dates?
August 19th through the 21st.
19th to the 21st. Be there or be square. And of course, great thanks to India Mandelkern. Check out her book. Greg, Scotty, the producer, he's going to put a link to the Amazon where you can buy that book, not .ca.com. Okay, most people are Americans that listen to this show. And her Instagram and her LinkedIn will be found on the getagriponline.com website. Thank you, India, for joining us today.